Hi, my name is Jenny Ames, and I'm Manager of Online Learning Content, and I'm here with Matt Sample, who is the Senior Legal Counsel. Today we're going to be talking about how to responsibly use AI and some of the things that InterSystems is doing and thinking about in that space. And we're hoping you really also start to think about how you can responsibly use AI through this conversation. Now, AI is changing quite a bit, so this is accurate to today's conversation, but can you tell us, Matt, at a high level, what does it really mean to responsibly use AI?
There is the use that you intend. There's when we go seek a function that is an AI-driven utility, and we purposefully go use that. But there's also the behind-the-scenes elements where we might go use a cloud service, but that cloud service is also using AI. Are we using that AI? So that question can be up there, but we would say responsible use of AI is one where you have taken account of all of the major risks of the way that you're going to use a service or an AI, and then controlled them as well as you could. That can be just documenting them. It can also mean really putting controls in the way so they don't become a problem.
And so I know that InterSystems has spent a lot of time on really figuring out how we can responsibly use and what our commitment is to our customers. Can you tell us about those principles that we've identified there?
Well, responsible use for AI is really table stakes today in the marketplace, and we interact with a bunch of very critical, risk-averse market areas like finance and clinical safety. And when you're there, this is where you end up with principles like ours that communicate to the market how we're going to control this.
That's great.
And so the primary principles that we've taken up include a focus on augmenting human potential, so not replacing people, but giving them more capacity. The belief that transparency and explainability and traceability of AI is an important function for AI whenever you're offering it as a product or service. We believe in making sure that we are avoiding harmful discrimination and bias in AI and how it's been configured. And also, we have to guard the privacy and the ownership of the data that is inherent to the use of AI. So those are the first four. Finally, we hold ourselves accountable for the safety and security so much so that we have to subject every use of AI to this kind of a critical lens. And those 5 steps are really the principles that we're applying to all of our use of AI internally and how we want to construct it for our products and services outside the company as well.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And the one about transparency, too, I think is an interesting one because this conversation is a great example of how we want to be transparent with some of the ways that we're thinking about AI.
Absolutely. One of the first things we do is try to rely that the humans are a good part of that control. We want them to be the judgment of whether something is working well. And so we try to make it very clear. What is the AI doing? What is it drawing on when it makes conclusions? How can we make it as explainable what has happened under the AI's control so that the people closest to it can make choices about that? Also so that other systems nearby can also be responsive if something is stepping outside the guardrails we think is the safe path.
That's great. And that first principle that you were talking about of augmenting the human, can you tell us a little bit about that and how we might need to change our perspective?
Sure. So that's where we look at this idea that we augment the person. We don't augment the function, we augment the person. And that way, if anybody was concerned, our people shouldn't have to worry about whether or not they're going to be replaced by an AI because we chose them. The AI is a new tool set, but they are the resource we want to be empowering and investing in.
Yeah, that's great. And so internally, I know that you've actually spent a lot of work on pulling a group of people together, which I think is really cool, to make sure that all of the projects are being evaluated, that we're asking the right questions, and we're making sure that we're uncovering as much of that risk as possible. Like, what are some of the things that you're thinking about when we're evaluating projects?
Absolutely. We start with making sure that this is aligned with what the purpose that we're seeking to achieve is. We don't want to throw AI at problems just because it's fun to throw AI at a problem, even if that can be a little bit educational. What we are looking for here really, though, is whether or not we have been able to control all the obvious risks. So do we have permission to use the data that way? Are we going to have outputs from this that potentially create risks? And if so, do we plan for them? Did we create a black box that we really don't know what happened inside, and so the outcome is a mystery? These sorts of transparency and explainability, those principles come in by us looking at whether or not we're engineering a solution that's going to keep itself revealed to us. So there's that piece. There's the piece around ownership and privacy and the security of these solutions. There's making sure that all of the steps that led up to the AI that we're going to be working with have all considered these same pieces. So we don't borrow an AI from somebody that has been trained on data that we couldn't trust or shouldn't have had access to. That's still us borrowing a problem. Instead, we would say we want to see that every step of the creation of this system was done at the same level of ethical commitment that we already have. We want to be able to make that promise from the top to the bottom to a customer.
But I think you've also mentioned something about risk can be difficult because sometimes we may not know all the risk that's out there.
Oh, sure.
So I don't know, do you want to speak on that at all?
Sure. So the idea of trying to corner all of the risk is very difficult. AI being the type of technology it is, you're trying to find all of the risks of something extremely broad and capable of reaching into everything. So what we draw on to try to put together a model that we could actually get all the way through to have an assessment. For this, we used primarily inputs from NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which have a very verbose AI risk framework. And that's so big, you essentially have to almost build a model of the world in your thinking there. And that's more than we need for most of our scenarios. But we take concepts from that and then try to bring them down to the level that makes sense for our projects. So we draw from these trade consortiums, we draw them from governments, we pay attention to new laws on the matter, including the EU AI Act, and we try to bake all of those back into our understanding of what do we need to look at for every single AI functionality we consider for the company.
So let's move on toward avoiding bias and discrimination. You can only do your very best at that, but can you give us some examples of things that maybe we should be concerned or just aware of to avoid bias and discrimination as much as possible?
So financial transactions or a company's security or the health of a patient, when these things are being involved, there's usually so many inputs that AI might be the only thing that could answer that question, at least having got to all the information. But the assumption that it's right is one that you really should not believe. A very common example of this that I like to point to, because we're in the healthcare space, is that early examinations of billing records to ask an AI, where's the smart place to invest to try to improve public health? It tended to go to wherever you spent the most money the first time and say, well, this group needs the most help, obviously. But that tends to be the richest group who spent the most money, not the group who actually had the lowest health. So this is one of those cases where you can see why AI came up with its conclusions, but it's a misunderstanding of the data. It's a bias. And so we'd have to think about that in every context we apply it. How can we find a way that this would be misunderstood, and is it going to be a problem? So once there's risk involved at that level, we would say you avoid a lot of your bias and discrimination by making sure that somebody capable of making that judgment, we want them to have a look at it and have all of the information they thought was relevant to make that call. So that means possibly having your determinations from an AI come with the citations it relied on, explain its logic, ask the computer to show its math.
Yeah, that's great. And that aligns with keeping the human in the loop and augmenting your humans, figuring out how to build that process with both parties involved.
Yeah, healthcare is inherently risky. But we want to take as little risk as possible. We want this to be the alleviation of all that risk. So that again comes back to this idea of how do you make it as responsible as you can, ultimately.
And I think there was a piece in there too that you were kind of like under the covers of actually using AI can actually be part of the strategy to avoid bias and discrimination, right?
Absolutely, especially when it's complex. You may have no way that you can honestly get to all of the material in the time frame you need. An AI may be better at like making that assessment, making some guesses about where you've been weak in your own thinking, or having multiple AI play off of each other. All of these can help get you faster to the right answer and then test over time in a way that we can start really building trustability into the model.
That's great. So, going along the theme of trust, guarding privacy and data ownership is another one of the principles. So can you tell us a little bit about what InterSystems is doing to guard privacy and data ownership?
I can. I would say that this is probably our most important risk because it's one of the most difficult to treat. A lot of the data we work with doesn't come directly from us. And so once you've got multiple data streams, multiple sources of information out there, this is a lot to keep track of to make sure that we have data that we're allowed to use in the way we're going to use it, and that it can be useful as that kind of data. So let me tell you 3 of the evaluation criteria that we would consider. I think 3. The first would be that when we're looking at that data, we would ask, is the data that we trained the AI on different than the data that we're going to see in the market? We don't want it to use the same because it's going to hide its bias from us in some ways. So we want a comparison to be able to figure out, did we get the right results when we asked it similar questions? And questions that were appropriate for the use case. So the next evaluation is going to be whether or not the data that we're using to train is independent in a way, not just of what the market has, but is it right for the moment that we're trying to train? If I give an AI information about all the demographics inside Boston, but I'm really only curious about the demographics of certain professions, that's a very fundamentally different set of starting material. And this is why we also want to make sure the data is separate, but it's also got to be accurate for the use case we're going to work with. And then finally, the data that's coming to supply this AI with functionality over time, is that data appropriate for the questions we're going to be asking? So we may have been able to train it, we may have been able to test it, and we may be able to see that data it starts with is reasonably appropriate. But the life cycle of this AI is one that's got a stream of data over time. And as it starts to get data that's not from the right sources, because maybe you don't have any more of the right source data, you can introduce bias at a point where it's already out of the box and live. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of avenues here where we're concerned about and trying to control the data. With that much data in your in your needs to be able to run an AI, you have to have a way of making sure that all of it was safe to use. So that means trying to find synthetic data at times so that it's all fake. That can mean trying to find real data you're allowed to use. And that can also mean that there can be awkward conversations where a party really wants to use some data that they have. And we have to tell them that, well, you're not allowed to use that, and neither are we with you.
And if you're using some sort of AI tool that's out there, what you put into the prompt is also something that needs to be considered, right?
Yes. So it's possible today to coerce an AI to give you back information that it has been trained on. Now, you have to sort of get it to announce what it has learned, and there's a lot of protection around that, but it is possible, and so security analysts have pointed out, you really can't just give a bunch of sensitive information to an AI just because, in theory, it's kind of hard to get back. That's not enough. We can't give it information about patients. We can't give it information that would be embarrassing to a customer trying to fix a system. We can't talk with public AIs about that. So as a result, that means if somebody's contacting us for support or service or help with a security problem, we're keeping that just as quiet as they are because that's necessary to keep the patients, the financial exchanges, the companies that are running on that data. We're trying to make sure that all of them are having a successful life cycle, and so are their customers.
But there are safe ways of being able to do that, such as having something that's private, right?
There are. There's a few. The ones that we will see the most are going to be the ones where we're consuming a very controlled service. So this is like Microsoft's contracts committing never to retrain AI elsewhere on it. Keep it only inside of your organizational tenant. That's still going into the cloud, but it's going into a cloud that's very controlled and making promises to keep it safe. There's also building them locally. There's using open source AI that you bring down your large language model and you train your own AI within your doors and you don't take it back out. There's a lot of ways to get there, but it really has to just sort of match your moment.
So this has been a great conversation. Could you just summarize for us maybe your top takeaways that you want people to come away with on how to responsibly use AI or
Sure.
other things?
I would say that my number one is that this is a time for enthusiasm and inspiration. So number one would be that don't step on your ideas or decide they're too small just because you're not sure how you would accomplish them. It's a great time to bring it forward. Second would be that This is a risky area, and we're going to have to take that seriously. So coming forward quickly also means that we can spend the time to really do this right at a comfortable pace. But we can make sure that we have all the appropriate evaluations to actually finish the process of vindicating an idea. That part, I think, is one of the most important. Like, we should think of this as part of the life cycle of an idea now. We go through an evaluation process and we get it out. But that's probably the biggest thing for internal teams to know. And for our customer base, I would want them to know that every idea that we are bringing out, it's going through these levels of review. So that also means that we need their feedback. As much as we love bringing something to the market that we have a great deal of enthusiasm around, we also need customers to be revealing where are the problems that no one's paying attention to. Because this is a great time for AI to be augmenting the people that are experiencing those problems. They're often administrative. That's a great place to be applying this sort of technology in exactly the right spirit where it has a long-term impact that improves the service, product, or a customer's experience.
That's great. Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you so much for being here.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.